thirst receptor, thirst area in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
That could increase.
So, when is thirst initiated? During exercise. So we're going to have usually there's a certain change in plasma volume. Usually it can be 4 to 5% is when thirst is initiated. Now that's problematic because sometimes you can see some, depending upon the environments of the exercise, you can see decreases in performance before your thirst is initiated and required to drink water. So that's why we have people, when you're in, let's say, a heated environment in August and you're training with your football team, you force them to drink. So you have prescribed water breaks at certain times and you require them to drink an amount of volume, which they may not want to. They may not feel like they need to drink that much, but they do because their thirst is initiated until 4 to 5% dehydration, okay? So that's why you're forcing these people to drink because they may not drink on their own in regards to that. And some people are even later down, maybe 5-6% before they initiate thirst, okay?
I thought the 3 to 4 minute mark, why is it level off all of a sudden, but because of reallocation from digestive, other.
So if you think about there's other factors going along with this as well. So we also have the ADH that's working as well. So multiple factors are trying to maintain that plasma volume. So they're all trying to, right in here, you may have ADH that's kicking in that levels it off a little bit, but ultimately you're losing more than you're able to maintain, and so that's why you start to get something that looks like this now, as you get more aldosterone, more ADH, as you get more dehydrated. And then ultimately what it'll do is level them off. So initially you probably get the response here that says, wow, this was a pretty huge drop right here, we need to preserve it. It does a pretty good job of it, and then it realizes that it's not, and then you get a larger increase in aldosterone and likely ADH. Okay. Because the activity is whatever the concentrations of ADH or aldosterone aren't enough to maintain that plasma volume. Now, make sure that you notice on this one, this is actual aldosterone concentration in nanograms per ml. Okay, so we're not talking about a percent change in this figure, but actually the absolute concentration of aldosterone. Questions on this? I think it's pretty easy. Plasma volume goes down, aldosterone goes up. No matter if it's an intense exercise or if it's going to be endurance exercise over a long period of time. So let's get back to cortisol. So when do you guys hear about cortisol? I'm guessing your cortisol will be pretty high on Wednesday.
It's under stress.
Yeah, it's a stress hormone, just like that. Okay, so exercise, stress, exam time, bone breaks. Obviously would be a stress, or burns. Burns are huge stress on the system. But cortisol is going for, in respect to exercise, what do we want it to do? Promotes protein breakdown for gluconeogenesis. Maybe not, we don't want that to do that. But we want it to stimulate free fatty acid mobilization, new glucose synthesis, okay, and block uptake of glucose into the cells so that we now use the free fatty acids. Very similar to what we saw with growth hormone. What does this do? This cascade right here maintains blood glucose during exercise. Free fatty acid mobilization, blocking uptake of glucose so we use those free fatty acids and then stimulate new glucose, okay? So how do you measure cortisol? You can measure cortisol obviously in the blood, but what's another way you can do it? There's a very non-invasive measure. We should get something we can do. Spit, saliva. You can measure salivary cortisol and see what you guys' cortisol responses are during the exam on Wednesday. See if it goes up. So everybody will have their own tube that they can spit in during the exam, and then we'll measure plasma cortisol or salivary cortisol. Very nice way to do that. I've done that before when we're measuring cortisol. Okay.
Do you really want to block the uptake of glucose
That's
during
good.
exercise?
It's a good question.
As a stress response, yes, but I would say no as a if you're exercising. Long term and stuff.
What's my goal here?
Well, I know that you want to preserve blood glucose.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of muscle cells, don't you want that glucose in the muscle cell already? To have closer there, so make more energy.
So the question is if, which organ is more, needs glucose more than skeletal muscle? The brain. And so if I drop blood glucose levels because I'm shuttling into skeletal muscle, is that going to be problematic? Especially given that that's a large mass of skeletal muscle.
Yeah.
So if my goal is to maintain blood glucose, I don't want glucose going into the cells to be used for exercise.
Right. I'm more asking, that's not necessarily the best thing.
Not necessarily the best thing, and it's going to depend on what kind of exercise you're doing, right? So if we're doing, this hormone does it, growth hormone does it as well, preserves plasma glucose, okay? So we're going to stimulate free fatty acid mobilization and promote the use of those fatty acids as fuel. Are we going to be able to do maximal exercise? Probably not. Why?
Because you free fatty acids over stored glucose.
That's exactly right. So then at some point, when exercise, the intensity goes up, what are we going to want to do? Use glucose to bring it into the cells, right? And what is the stimulus to bring glucose into the cells? Insulin. So now, if we were to look ahead into the future, what do you think would happen to insulin during exercise?
Probably increase.
Or would it go down because you want to block the uptake of glucose in the cells, and then it would turn up when we needed glucose in the cells? Think that would happen? We'll see. We'll look into the future in that one and see what that has, okay? So again, this one we have same thing. Stress is sensed by the hypothalamus. Corticotrophic releasing hormone or adrenocorticotrophic releasing hormone acts upon the pituitary gland. ACTH goes to the adrenal cortex, releases cortisol. All of these things happen. With exercise, we're using it to preserve blood glucose. So now let's talk about it in relationship. If you're just not doing anything and you're stressed out from an exam and you have cortisol in there, is that a good thing to have a stress hormone circulating through your blood? So we're only talking about these effects with relationship to exercise. What else does cortisol do? Cortisol can suppress your immune system, okay? So if you have a high level of stress, you're constantly pumping out cortisol. Cortisol can have an effect on the immune system. It can suppress your immune system. Guess what happens when you're stressed? You get sick, okay? So that's not going to help you in regards to performance on an exam, is by having a huge amount of stress and pumping cortisol into the system, okay? So what should you do before the exam? Be ready. Study. Use your time wisely. Don't stay up all night the night before studying for the exam. Don't come in hopped up on caffeine because you had to stay up all night for the exam, because then you come in, you're all stressed out, okay? And potentially could be affecting maybe some metabolism so that your brain isn't getting the glucose that it needs, potentially. So we'll see how that goes. So we'll monitor blood glucose in you guys as well, okay? To make sure that we are doing what we're supposed to do. So just to review, go back to these short-term and more prolonged stresses. Again, the catecholamines reduced from the adrenal medulla are going to be more of our short-term response patterns, and then the more prolonged ones are going to be with these mineralocorticoids, aldosterone, and glucocorticoids, cortisol. Okay, and you can see right here, suppression of the immune system is one of the things that cortisol does. Questions on that? A lot of stuff in a short period of time when you're talking about the adrenal glands, okay? And so one of the things, so Jackson Davis, who obviously had some issues with his blood pressure, one of the things that they did is they did blood work to look at his adrenal glands, and also did a scan to make sure that he didn't have a tumor on his adrenal glands that was affecting specifically the release of these corticoids that could cause some issues with his blood pressure. So great news is he does not have a tumor on his adrenal glands. His adrenal glands look fine. So now the question is why does he have his blood pressure issues? Because he chose his parents poorly. And in this case, it's Mrs. Davis. And if she finds out, maybe you go down. Just like you do.
She doesn't do it.
She knows, not the fact that I'm telling you guys that she's the reason for that. Okay? But that's what I'm saying is he picked a really good parent and then a really bad parent. That's what I'm saying. Carmen, don't write that down. You're using this as against me, okay? So let's look at the adrenal medulla in a little more detail, just because it's also going to be this fast-acting hormone. How do we get that to do, okay? So epinephrine is the adrenal medulla's primary secretion. About 80% is going to be epinephrine, okay? Norepinephrine is primarily secreted from adrenergic neurons, okay, of the sympathetic nervous system. So that's where we get the term neurohormone when we started this whole chapter, okay? Norepinephrine can be released from sympathetic neurons, okay? But it also can be released from the adrenal gland. So that makes it a neurohormone in the fact that it can be released from both nerves and a gland, okay? They're fast acting. We know that they're fast acting. They're part of this fight or flight response that you hear about, okay? So when you have something comes in here and challenges us, in the syllabus we have an active shooter protocol now that we put in there, right? So what are we going to do if there's we get an, all of a sudden our phones go off and say there's an active shooter in the Simmons building? Are we going to have an immediate response to that? Yeah, we're probably going to have a fight or flight response because we're going to have to react quickly on what we're able to do. What are we going to do if there's an active shooter? Does anybody know?
Like in elementary school, you just hide in the corner.
So this place is, first of all, we need to find out where the shooter's at, but we want to Katie bar the door. I think that would be the first thing we'd want to do. Maybe flip a table up covering that window right there so that we couldn't get that. And then we're going to get in a position where the person can get us. So I would say that this would be at the front of the, I don't know if it'd be the front of the room.
That corner?
Back of the room. Yeah, if he's shooting from the window, we're in trouble because this is pretty, but we maybe get down a little bit, so. I would like to barricade us in here, flip these tables over and start creating some kind of protective shelter with tables. So is anybody else okay with that? What I don't need anybody to do is panic. Who's going to be the person that panics?
If Trump was here, he'd run in here without a weapon.
I'm sure you would. Yeah. I also wanted to, who is the person that we want to send out to see if the shooting's over? I'd like that vote right now.
Lance.
I'll do it.
Lance. No, it's quick. I want Lance to go. Wow, a little tension there. Fight or fight going on right here. I want Hannah to go. You want to know why? Because she was late to class, Carmen. So when you're the last one into class, guess what? You're the first one out when there's an active shooter. You think that's fair? I think that's fair. I don't know. Except on one. Except on one. And plus, I don't know if that's going to hold up in a court of law. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Hannah, the reason your daughter went out to look for the active shooter is because she was late to class.
It was unfortunately a Wednesday.
It was unfortunate. And unfortunately, it was a Wednesday, which no one's going to even know what the hell happened. So, norepinephrine can bind to alpha and beta receptors on tissues, okay? And the effect will depend on the hormone and the receptor type. So, let's take a look at this, okay? So, take a look at the beta receptors first. There's 3 beta receptors, beta 1, beta 2, beta 3. Let's look at the beta 1 to start with. So, if we were to look at what hormone it likes, equally likes epinephrine and norepinephrine, okay? Works through the adenylate cyclase mechanism, which we talked about early on in the chapter, increased cyclic AMP. But what you see is an increase in heart rate, increase in glycogenolysis, and an increase in lipolysis. So increase in heart rate, we know. What's increase in glycogenolysis? What is that?
Lessons, so glycogen and liver affect glucose.
So we're breaking down glycogen, right, in liver and muscle. So increased breakdown of glycogen. Lipolysis, increased breakdown of fats. Okay? So if we have norepinephrine binding to a beta-1, we're going to have increased heart rate, increased glycogenolysis, and lipolysis. Okay? Good. Those are all important, I think, in exercise. Is that correct? Okay? So beta-2, now beta-2 receptors like epinephrine much more than they do norepinephrine. Okay? Mechanism is the same, adenylate cyclase, cyclic AMP. Here we have increased bronchodilation and increased vasodilation. Is that a good response to have during exercise? I would say so. Yeah, so we want to dilate those bronchioles so that we get more in and vasodilate, specifically sending more blood flow to skeletal muscle. I think that'd be a good response. Okay? So beta-2s look like they're good with regards to what we want to have happen. Let's go look at beta-3s now. So beta-3s, reversed here, norepinephrine greater than epinephrine, still the same adenylate cyclase mechanism, increasing cyclic AMP. Okay, and what do we get there with the beta-3s? Increased lipolysis. Okay, so all three of those, beta-1, beta-2, beta-3, seem like those are good receptors to have catecholamines to bind to during exercise. Okay? Increased heart rate, increased use of glycogen, increased vasodilation to skeletal muscle, increased dilation in the bronchioles, and increased breakdown of fats. I think those are all pretty good things to happen during exercise. So now let's look at the alpha ones. So what do you think the alpha ones do then? If you know anything about the body, it's probably going to be if they bind to alpha receptors, you're going to have the opposite effect, right? Great news, that's it. So alpha-1 receptors, epinephrine greater than norepinephrine with its effect, and alpha-1 uses a different mechanism. It's the phospholipase C, which increases calcium in the cell, and we get an increase in phosphodiesterase, but more importantly, we get an increase in vasoconstriction. Do we want vasoconstriction during exercise? Certain areas we do, that's exactly right. So maybe we're sending catecholamines to skeletal muscle and the lungs, okay, and maybe to our fat cells and liver, but maybe other cells are now going to be getting increased vasoconstriction with regards to blood flow to the digestive system, maybe to the kidneys, okay, areas where we don't want them to go with this fight or flight response, okay. It's going to depend on, again, where we want our blood flow and what the responses that we want to happen, okay. So, but it also has the same effect on the tissues like skeletal muscle, cause vasoconstriction in skeletal muscle. So if we want to exercise and then increase in vasodilation is wanted, we're probably hoping the catecholamines bind to beta receptors during exercise on skeletal muscle as opposed to alpha receptors, okay? And that could be related to the receptor affinity and the number of receptors on the cells, skeletal muscle cells, and which will bind where. During exercise, we want more affinity for catecholamines to the beta receptors and more beta receptors as opposed to alpha ones. Alpha-2, epinephrine is greater than norepinephrine with effect. This goes back to the adenylate cyclase mechanism, increased cyclic AMP. Okay, what does it do? Opposes the actions of beta-1 and beta-2 receptors, decreased insulin secretion. Okay, why would that be a good thing? What does insulin do? That's exactly right. So we're decreasing it. So why would we decrease insulin secretion, thereby decreasing glucose uptake through cells? Maintain plasma glucose, right? That's the whole goal of this chapter in hormones, is to maintain plasma glucose, right? Okay? Questions about these? Pretty straightforward, I think. Anything? So let's stop here for a second, Wendy. Let's review. Let's take the old show all the way back to the start of the hormones chapter. Stop when you see something that might be important.
Yeah, stop it going.
That's another reason why we don't review any. We'd just be going over the same stuff again and again. Okay? So we just talked about mechanisms of hormone action, right? So we talked about that. Just came up again with regards to alpha beta 1 receptors, is that correct? So is that going to be an important concept? Well, yes. Okay? So do you think growth hormone is going to be important?
Can you go back for a second?
Matt?
Uh-huh.
Good?
Yeah.
You think growth hormone is going to be important?
Yes.
I hope so. We talked about it for a couple slides. How about this? I would say so. Probably going to be important. This?
Yes.
I only showed that slide like 4 times, didn't
Probably won't be on the test that way.
I? No, if it's shown 4 or 5 times, it won't be on the test. That's not true, Wendy. Don't write that down. If I show it 4 times, it's on the test. I think there's a lot of stuff on this test.
What about that?
We just spent about 10 minutes talking about beta 1 receptors. Do you think they're important? Wendy, look at me. Do you think they're important? Yes. You're important. Just let me know. You know what's not important? The slides that I didn't spend much time on.
You should print that version of the slide.
Yes. Yes. I'll have a stamp of approval on it. Changes in plasma epinephrine, norepinephrine during exercise, percent change over a period of time, as you would expect, goes up. Okay, quite a bit. Okay, epinephrine goes from about 0% change to approximately 200 over an hour. Norepinephrine much higher, 0 to 600% change. Okay, again, talking about percent change here, not absolute concentration of those hormones. Okay. So we already know that these catecholamines, and we haven't talked about this yet, but epinephrine is going to play a key role in responses to insulin and glucagon and what's going to happen with use of free fatty acids and maintaining blood glucose, okay? But you know that because this is what we've talked about. We said the hormones that we're talking about in response to exercise are to maintain plasma glucose and increase the use of free fatty acids. If you get confused on something, throw that bad boy out there and I probably guarantee it gives you some credit on it. What does norepinephrine do? Maintains blood glucose, increases the use of free fatty acids. Okay, so if you go look back at some of those things. Now, epinephrine and norepinephrine are probably going to be doing it in different routes than the other ones, but the end effect is we're using more fat and we're maintaining plasma glucose. Try that one sometimes, especially when you get down. So, we'll stop there. Any questions so far? Pretty good? Okay. So, now let's talk about insulin and glucagon. Okay. So, the pancreas has both exocrine and endocrine functions. What does that mean? What does exocrine mean?
Transports into the tissues in the body.
That's endocrine.
It's secreted into the duct.
That's exactly right. So it's not in the bloodstream, but it's secreted somewhere or close with the duct. What's an exocrine gland? Dr. Luca.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
sweat gland, right?
Sweat gland is, yeah. That'll give you an F on a test. What's the exocrine gland? What's another? Let me rephrase the question, Noah. What's another exocrine gland?
Sweat glands.
Pancreas. Everybody loves it. A comedy guy. Hey, what's an exocrine gland? Pancreas. So, Okay, so we're gonna get insulin from what? Beta cells in the pancreas, okay? So if you have, what kind of diabetes do you have a problem with your beta cells?
That one.
Type 1, okay? Or what did it used to be called?
Regular old diabetes.
Ju-
Diabetes.
juvenile. Regular old diabetes. And my mom calls it the diabetes.
The diabetes.
So it's not diabetes type 1 or type 2, it's just the
The
diabetes. You know, old Phil got the diabetes. So, and I told her that you can't use that term because it's not the diabetes. But then she just gets angry at me and says that I'm trying to be a smart ass. So, old Dusty got the diabetes the other day. It's like it's something you catch down at the pond. I've also heard it referred to in conversations, the sugars. So, old Dusty got the sugars. So, I don't know what that means, but if you hear that, try to correct them. So insulin promotes the storage of glucose, amino acid, and fats. Lack of insulin is called diabetes mellitus, okay? So if we were to, if you have problems producing it, it is type 1. If you have lack of response, it's type 2. Glucagon is from the alpha cells, promotes the mobilization of fatty acids and glucose, okay? We look at our diagram here. Imagine that, it's a negative feedback loop, okay? So we want to maintain blood glucose about 90 milligrams per 100 mLs. So how many people have gone in for their blood test to see if they've had their blood sugar is normal within the last year? How do you know you don't have the diabetes?
Lactose.
What's that?
So I don't want lactose.
Wow.
Do you think if you have lactose, it might be a little too late for the diagnosis of diabetes? Let's not use that model of when we should go get our blood sugar checked.
The guy from
When our-
Mr. Deeds, the butler. No, it was him. That's Mr. Deeds.
Yeah,
Like,
that
Adam
was
Sandler?
Frostbite.
Yeah, Frostbite. Blackfoot.
Jeez. And so let's also reflect back that Austin is interfacing with the public right now. And so he's telling people, oh, you don't have to worry about it until your toes turn black. Wow. It's a business model that works well, doesn't it? Okay. So if you have high increased blood glucose level, what's going to happen? Okay, pancreas is going to release insulin. Okay, and we're going to get glycogen formation in the liver, and we're going to take glucose up by the cells. Glucose falls to a normal range. Okay. Conversely, if we have low glucose levels, pancreas is going to secrete glucagon, stimulate glycogen breakdown, also going to get a fatty acid use. Hopefully by breaking down glycogen and using free fatty acids, we're going to spare blood glucose, rise back to a normal range. Okay, so a little bit of the old negative feedback loop with insulin and glucagon working with each other in unison. Okay, so busy slide here, busy slide, but basically if you look at it, one goes one direction and one goes the other direction. Okay, so let's take a look at it. So insulin on 3 different tissues, adipose tissue, muscle tissue, and liver, okay, is going to cause plasma glucose to go into adipose tissue, and what you're going to get is storage of free fatty acids as triglycerides, okay. Plasma glucose is going to go into muscle, okay, we're going to use it as glucose, stored as glycogen. If we're exercising, we may use that glucose, okay, and then glucose is going to be uptaken by the liver and may be stored as glycogen. The key in that is you're now taking plasma glucose and it's being uptaken by the cells. Glucose is going into the cells. If we're exercising, that may be a bad thing, specifically with skeletal muscle, because we'll use it. So if we're trying to maintain plasma glucose, insulin may not be the best choice because it's having cellular uptake of plasma glucose, okay? So now if we look at glucagon, increased glucagon on the bottom part of the slide, if we were to look at the same tissues, adipose tissue, in this case liver tissue, okay, what is glucagon going to do? It's going to break down triglycerides into free fatty acid and glycerol so that we can use these free fatty acids by skeletal muscle. And in the liver, we are going to break down glycogen so that we can get glucose, and also convert amino acids and glycerol to glucose that then come out of the cell and increase plasma glucose. Okay? So during exercise, what are we trying to do? We're trying to maintain plasma glucose and increase our reliance on free fatty acids. So which hormone was likely going to increase during exercise? Glucagon. Okay? Insulin is an uptake of glucose to the cells. We don't want that. We want to keep that going. So plasma concentrations of insulin decrease during exercise. Okay? Whereas plasma concentrations increase during exercise. So this is an interesting topic, and I don't want to talk about it. Okay? We'll talk about it later. It's talking about increased glucagon sensitivity, but I don't want to talk about that because this is more important. So changes in plasma insulin during exercise. Okay? So let's look at this panel here. Panel A. Right in the center. Keep it centered. Okay? So we're looking at a percent change in plasma insulin. 0, minus 25, minus 50, all the way down to minus 100. And we're looking at percent VO2 max. Noah did this figure. Did we predict this figure back in the past, earlier in class? Yeah. So what happens to exercise is you get a decrease in insulin concentrations up to about 60% VO2 max. And then what do you see? Starts to go back up. Okay? So in this area, what are we trying to do? We're trying to keep glucose in the plasma or the blood. So insulin concentrations have gone down. We want to increase our reliance on free fatty acids. But what happens at 60%, approximately 60% VO2 max?
Start using less fatty acids for energy.
That's exactly right. Now we've gone to more, let's say, anaerobic metabolism, right? And so now we need to rely on glycolysis rather than fatty acids coming into stage 1 of oxidative phosphorylation. So in order to do that, what do we have to do? We have to reverse that trend in insulin now. Because now we need to rely on glycolysis without oxygen, we now need to get that glycolysis into skeletal muscle, so we see an increase in insulin, okay? Because now we need to use that glucose. And now we've gotten to an area now we're using maximal exercise. Are we really concerned about plasma glucose?